Yo, what's up guys? Here for another build series, doing the EB48 2.1. Welcome to part 1. We're starting with bag A. We're going to knock out A, B, C, and D right now. Thanks for joining in, and yeah, let's just get started. Opening up A and B, it's just the diffs. This build right here, it's going to be my personal car that I'll be racing at AMS. So I'm going to go there with the fresh Buggy. Alright, let's just knock these bags open here. Alright, there we go. We got our parts all ready. We can start putting these things together. I need steel spur gear. Alright, there we go. Steel spur gear ready to go. Get me some grease. So what we're going to do is start, I'm going to just do all 3 diffs together, and I just start with greasing up these parts. So I use a white grease. This is actually a Kyosho grease. It's called Kyosho ring gear grease. So I put it where all the bearings sit. So I'll do the ring gears and the spur gear. Not too much, just enough to cover all the metal surface that the bearings will be sitting on. And I do all the diff cups as well. There we go. Do this last one. And then I do the out drives. I just do like the O-ring groove area. So I'll do each out drive. There we go. Got two more. Boom. Forgot a rag. Start me out a fresh microfiber here. All right, so we're all greased up. Now we start putting the bearings on. Then we got one more grease. We got some O-ring grease that needs to go on the O-rings. Get them nice and coated. You want them to be coated all over. Nice, there we go. We're ready to start putting these things together. So I kind of do them all in steps here. So I'll go ahead, put the O-ring in. With the E-Buggy, all the out drives are the same, so you don't have to worry about that. As you can tell, I'm just building these straight 2.1 with the 2.1 case and just the standard round shim. If you watch my Nitro Buggy build video, you saw that I used the 2.0 case with the new keyed in shim. You can kind of use one or the other, it doesn't really matter. So the 2.0 or the 2.0 cup just gives you a little bit more oil in the diff, which isn't a huge deal. This cup is designed a little bit differently, and so that keyed in shim you want to use just on the 2.0 cup, not really on the 2.1 cup. So yeah, that's kind of the reason behind that. Alright, getting this thing built up nice. Well, butterfingers with some greasy fingers there. So I'm installing the pin as well, so that we'll be able to go ahead and put some gears on there next. Alright, go ahead and put the gasket on that ring gear. Make sure it's lined up properly with the holes. Nice, nice. Whoops. spur gear here. I like to use the steel spur gear. It's a little bit noisier, which it's kind of annoying sometimes, but I feel like it actually drives a little bit better than the plastic. The plastic seems like it almost is faster, which is kind of weird. And then just the risk of you know, a tooth getting knocked off or something. These e-buggies, they just have crazy power, and you know, I just can't really take a gamble like that at the big races and stuff. So any race really. So I just run the steel. Works good for me. All right, there we go. Got all the cups ready. I'm gonna go ahead, put the first sun gear in. So we'll just go in order: front, center, rear. So once I put a sun gear in, I'm gonna start adding some oil. I'm gonna do 7K in the front for this car. When I put the sun gear in, I like to rotate the gears just to make sure the oil's getting everywhere in there. Kind of builds up some bubbles, get the air out. Now I'll move to the center. Put that gear in. I'm going to do a 6K in my center. Might be a little heavy on the heavy side, but I want to give it a try. Probably end up with 5, but oh, getting ahead of myself for some reason. Alright, now the rear. Make sure these pins are centered in your outdrive when you drop that sun gear in, so that it goes on all the way. Alright, so we got 7, we got 6, now I'm going to do some 4 for the rear. Put the oil in, rotate the outdrive some, get the bubbles coming out. Alright. And now I'm going to start putting the rest of the gears in. I use stock steel pins and my diffs cross pins. These cross pins key in nicely, so make sure that you do that correctly. If you don't, the gears will just be sticking way up, so it'd be pretty noticeable if you didn't have that right. But they key in, pushing down nicely. Got one pretty filled up there with oil. Now I'm going to move on to the center. There we go. Try not going too fast in this build series. So you guys can kind of, if you're building your car and watching this, so you can kind of get ready. if you want to make it easier, you could have all your bags and stuff open, get your stuff out, and then kind of watch through so you can kind of build it with me. If you want to do that, that'd be pretty cool, I think. So I'll try not to go too fast, but built quite a few kits, so it goes by fast sometimes. Alright, we're on the rear diff now. I like to always try to keep things in order so I don't get mixed up at all. As soon as we put the tops on these things, then I'll write what diff is what. But for now, we'll just try. I always go from left to right and from front to rear. So you can see the oil is starting to settle in. You know, it's getting in all the gears, getting underneath all the pins, behind the gears, everything like that. So now I'm going to put the last gear in on the top. When you push down, you're going to have some oil come out. That's what you want so that you know the diff is full. That one didn't have as much, so I'll add a little bit. I'll give a little rotate when I put the last gear on too. Not sure if I did that with this front one. You can see some more air bubbles and stuff kind of popping up, which is good. Alright, now for the rear. Nice. Alright, I think those are all filled up how they should be. And we should be good. See some air bubbles kind of coming up through the side of the top sun gear there and kind of popping and stuff, so I'll let them sit just for a little bit. I'll start getting my screws ready. I'm going to use some Lunsford tie screws. I'm going to get them all ready here. Be using 14 mil screw. Make sure I got all the right lengths. There we go. I need one more set. Boom. There we go. I also glue all my screws in, so I'll be using some glue. This I find just helps keep the diffs tight. I've noticed with these Tekno diffs that sometimes the screws will loosen up when I come back from a race, open up my diffs to check everything out and to freshen up stuff if I'm going to go practice or go testing or whatever, or if I'm going to another event. Sometimes when I first kind of started running the cars, I would notice that these screws would be a little bit loose, so I started gluing them in, and yeah, that's just worked really well for me. Alright guys, I wanted to show you how I top off the diffs here. So, got the diff full. It's a little too full, so I'm gonna run my finger over the top, get some of the excess oil. This is the front diff here. So you want the oil like just right at the top of the sun gear, just below. So it's going to be a little bit below the edges around the diff. And what I'll do also, put my wrench in there, get some of the oil where that pin's going to go. If you have too much oil in your diff, it will actually cause it to leak. Pressure builds up, and then it will normally leak out of like the O-ring spots. So there we go. Got the ring gear on. You want to make sure your gasket and everything's lined up. You can put a 1.5 wrench in there, kind of move it around if your gasket's a little bit off, but we got it on pretty good. Here I'll show you. I just put a little bit of glue inside the hole. You want to try to not get it on the gasket if you can. It's a little bit tricky though. I don't like to run my screws all the way in, so I won't go all the way in with the drill. This is a brand new car, so you're starting all the threads for the first time. So you want to make sure if you're using a drill or just your hand, that everything's straight, so you create some good threads in the plastic. And the Tekno plastic's a little different than some other cars, so I don't really ever use my drill to screw something all the way in. I have found that the plastic's a little soft and you can strip stuff out pretty easily. So then I use my wrench, tighten it down the rest of the way. You don't have to crazy crank on these. You'll just smash that gasket some, but you want to get them good and snug. And when you're building a brand new car, or like if you're rebuilding your diffs and you have a new gasket, the gasket's going to kind of smash down some, so you'll have to, the next time you go and do your diff or something, it might seem like these screws might be a little on the loose side, but it's because that gasket squishes down. So I don't replace my gaskets a whole lot. If I do, I'll do it like before I go to an event, so I run through practice, and I'll redo my diff oil at some point during the event. Like if I'm doing my car for the main or in the middle of the event, I don't like to put new gaskets on, just because I feel like it changes a little bit. So I like to have the gaskets kind of set in, smushed down a little bit already. Most of your leaking that I have found is not really caused by a gasket. You can have pretty beat up looking gaskets and they still seal good. It's normally you have too much oil, builds up too much pressure, and leaks out of the O-rings. So here we go, the center diff. Got the oil level where I want it. Got all the extra oil out. And what you want to do with these pins when you're putting the gears on the top is make sure your pin is centered in the outdrive, and also your pin is going in between the mounting holes, and you have your gear lined up so you can just match everything up nicely. And see, this one, the gasket moved a little bit, so I'll use my 1.5, try to straighten up the gasket in the hole. There we go, just like that. Get some glue. I will redo the glue every time I redo my diff. The glue doesn't mess up the threads or anything, and you should reapply it every time. The only thing you have to do is sometimes you'll get a little bit of a buildup, so after I take my screws out, take my diff apart, I'll just put like a 1.5 in there and kind of just knock that little glue ball out. If you let it build up too much, you might not be getting the screws all the way down. Go in a cross pattern when you're tightening these down, so don't just go around in a circle. Now they're all kind of snug, so then I'll check them in a circle, but when you're first tightening them down, go in a cross pattern, something like that. Feel that one. One feels good. Alright, so now we're on the last diff here, the rear diff. That oil level's pretty good. Get it out where the pin goes. Everything's lined up. Boom. Nice. Glue in there. Got the last 4 set of screws. One thing I will say, if you built the 2.0 Tekno cars, these diffs are going to feel a little bit different. They're going to feel, I don't know if gritty is the right word, but you're going to feel the gears in them a little bit more, especially when they're new. So don't think that you built your diff wrong. The 2.0 just had a different style of cut gear, and they felt really smooth. So these, you can feel the gears a little bit more, but you want it to be still consistent all the way around. If you have like tight spots in certain areas or something like that, take the diff apart, redo it. Sometimes if you tighten one side too tight, or you don't go in like a cross pattern, you can kind of get things crooked in there a little bit. These things feel really good. Diffs are all built. So that was bag A and B. So now we'll jump in to the next set of bags here. Put that grease away. We're all done with that. Diffs are done. Go ahead, mark on those. We got front 7. We got center 6. We got rear 4. Alright, there we go. I always like to use just a silver Sharpie right on the disc so you can keep track, know what's in there. It's always a bummer when you your car is working good or something and you're wanting to just kind of freshen up your oil, you're getting ready to go to a race or something like that, and you're like, oh man, can't remember what's in your diffs. Write on them, and always rewrite on them if you change them or something like that. So silver Sharpie works good. You can just use motor spray, or even like if you're at a race or something, you race nitro, you can use a little nitro fuel, will wipe that right off, and then you can yeah, write your oil change if you're making one. Alright. I'm going to put another little towel down, keep my screws on there so that they're not rolling off. I'm going to be using a mix of some Lunsford tie screws and the kit steel screws. Alright. I like to just go ahead and put these diff covers on. Maybe. Oh, there we go. This bad boy's snapping in. Use a 1.5 here. I like to just get this step out of the way. Alright, so this is the front. You'll notice the bulkheads will be similar. There's a little difference front to rear, and it's mainly just the reinforcement around this bearing and then also the bearing size. Just on the outside. The inside bearings are the same. Both of them are flat. The 2.0, this pinion gear was at an angle on the front diff, but not now. Not with the 2.1. Try to pop this bearing in. I got it a little crooked going in. I have to try that again. When you're popping these bearings in, you want to make sure that the bearing's nice and flat. There you go. So it goes in nice and straight, goes all the way down, so it's flush. Alright. Here, we're going to be putting in the pinion gear. And it will come with a little shim. It's like a large clutch shim. You're going to put the pinion gear in first, and then you put the shim on the outside. And that's just for spacing for the coupler. Alright, I'm going to get my set screw. I'm going to wipe my set screw off on my rag there and get some Loctite. I use red Loctite on these because I don't want them to fall off, come loose, give me a silly DNF that I don't want. Alright, when putting Loctite on, it's always good to wipe your screw clean. You can motor spray them if you want. I just wipe them down just to get the machine oil off, especially when it's a new car with new screws. Then when you put Loctite on, run the screw through your finger a little bit to get the Loctite all in the threads, so you don't just have a big blob. Sometimes if you have a big blob on there, you'll get Loctite in places you don't really want it, which isn't cool. On this e-buggy, you can actually, alright, what we'll do first, we'll check how free these bearings are. So you do it with it loose, so you can see what the bearings feel like. You can see it's spinning pretty free. And then you bring it down, if you don't want really to have any play. and then we'll spin it. So see, not spinning too free now. I think we actually got a little pressure. So normally these don't really get pressure, so make sure my bearing's all the way seated. I'll move this coupler out just a little bit so it has a tiny bit of movement. Now it's free. As you see, it's moving back and forth a little more than I would like. You don't really want play here, but you also don't want your bearing to be smashed too much, because then your car won't roll free, and also you'll build some heat and such in your bulkhead, which can cause a failure. Oh, there we go. So now it's free, and there's just barely any play forward and back. So that's super important to make sure that's right. Sometimes people will complain that their car's loose, not driving right, and you know, everyone wants a setup tip for that. Things like this, that can be the reason why your car doesn't drive good. So especially on the rear, you want to feel it with this really loose to feel your bearings so that you know how free your bearings are. And then you want to make sure you don't have forward and back play much, just a tick. Because if you have too much play, then that messes with your gear mesh for your ring and pinion gear, and you can have a failure in that. You can strip out your gears, cause some sort of issue, and it can also allow this to kind of just move around too much, so where you can, you know, have some failure in your bulkhead, the bearings, or your gears. So that's a super important part. Next thing is shimming your diff. So I always put the diff in with no gears, and I feel the side-to-side play. The side-to-side play is very important, just like this forward and back play, because your side-to-side keeps your gears from stripping out. If, you know, some people, they'll just feel it and, oh, there's a little bit of backlash, or the mesh feels good, but this diff can move side to side, so then your gear mesh is always changing. So with these Teknos, you can run some backlash. These ring and pinion gears last a really long time. The key is you want no movement side to side. You'll get 2 diff shims. I think the manual might say to put those in. Normally what I do, yeah, it says, yeah, it just says check fitment. Shows them both going opposite the gear side, which I don't really ever put mine on that side. So what I do is, normally a brand new car, you're not going to need any. After you run it for a little bit, maybe a couple hours, maybe more time than that, every time you put your diff in, check that side to side, because sometimes they'll break in a little bit. And normally most of my cars, after they break in, I run 1 diff shim and I put it on the diff gear side. You'll notice that per the kit, I am putting my diffs in backwards. I run my diffs on my e-buggy the same direction that I do on my nitro buggy. I just like the handling better, so my diffs will be going in backwards per what the manual says. But with the Tekno electronics, I can reverse my motor direction, and then my car is spinning the correct way. Alright, so I'm going to put the front diff in. Got the F7 for the front diff. Going to use some JTP copper grease. I just put it in 3 spots. Once you start spinning it around, start spreading out nice. This gear grease is awesome. The copper grease works super good. It's not too sticky, so your car stays rolling free, but it also stays pretty wet, so it doesn't turn like kind of pasty like some greases do. When they turn pasty, then they're not really lubricating the gears anymore, so you have to replace that grease more often and just kind of worry about it a little bit. Alright, using some Lunsford screws, so I'm not going to use the provided screws here. Like I said before, I don't go all the way in with the drill, so I finish everything off by hand. Not going to worry about tightening these too tight, just because you're only tightening the top, not going through the chassis and the A plate, tightening the bottom. I will go ahead, throw the front shock tower on. These can go on either direction. There's not like a front side or a back side. Again, using some Lunsford screws here. Brand new bulkhead. Sometimes the screws, they'll be singing on their way in, if you can hear that. Tekno's changed their bulkhead material a little bit since the time I've been there. These are a little bit harder than they were before, so screws sing a little going in when the bulkheads are new. Finishing up by hand here, snugging these down. Boom, there we go. I'm gonna wait to do these shock mounts on the top, just so I don't have screws hanging out the top. So I'll leave those alone. These are my extra screws. Save these diff shims. Boom, there we go. That was bag C, so now we'll jump into bag D here. Crack it open. This is going to be the rear bulkhead. Be a lot of the same parts as the front, but we'll have a wing mount and a body mount. Open up all the baggies. Try to keep a somewhat clean workbench. If you see me at the races, you'll be like, dude, your workbench is a mess at the races. And yes, unfortunately, sometimes it is. I have a hard time working really clean. Try my darndest to keep it clean and organized, but it's difficult. When I'm building the kit though, I like to have my workbench totally clean when I start, so that it can go smooth and be nice and organized. Alright, I'm going to do the diff cover first. Now we're working on the rear. Got some grease in there on my wrench. I'll show you the difference that I was talking about with the bulkheads. Like I said, really, like in a pinch, if you have a rear bulkhead or you have a front, you break one or something like that, you can technically use a front on the rear, a rear on the front. The difference is going to be the rear uses these bigger bearings on both sides, and it's just got a little bit more reinforcement around the bearing. The rear bulkhead just takes more abuse, like under braking and things like that, with you know, kind of oblonging these holes, and you know, where the bearing fitment gets kind of loose, and where people will have some ring and pinion gear issues. So it's just a little bit more reinforced on the rear. So go ahead, put the bearings in, put the ring gear on, put our shim on the outside. We got our little baby rear drive shaft here. Set screw, gonna clean that off. Some red Loctite. Rub that Loctite. Get it all in the thread so you're not making a mess getting it where it doesn't need to be. So just like the front, I'm going to put this on loose. So I have a bunch of play. I'm going to try to feel the bearings. It's a little harder to spin it like we did the front, but you can feel it in your fingers there. So let's see how this one goes. Also spin the other side. Alright, with no play, it's a little bit bound up feeling. So I just try to move it out a little to get a little backlash there. Feels pretty good. It's got like zero movement though, so sometimes this part can be tricky, time consuming, but it's super important. It's like when you see people and they're putting on their center drive shafts and their diffs not out of their car, I always just completely cringe because they have no idea how it's going on the pinion gear, and if it's free, if it's loose, if it's bound up, no idea. This thing is just giving me some fits here. I want it to have just a tiny bit backlash. Spin super free, but it's either loose or there's no movement. Ah, I think I got it. Darn it. What is the deal? Too loose now? Either loose or I'm tight. That's fine. This is something that you want to, oh, there we go. You can just see the difference there. A lot of people will think that it's alright, but that is going to be a huge disadvantage to your handling. Just barely any play back and forth. Go ahead. When I tighten these, I always put my finger under it so that you're not tweaking on those bearings. But you want to get these really nice and tight. And there you go, that thing's spinning super free. That is exactly what you want. So, just like the front, I'm going to check fitment. No movement side to side, so no shims. Put my 3 spots of copper grease on. Spin that around. Make sure those gears are totally covered. Put the diff cover on. Get my screws that I'm going to be needing. Let's see. I may have used the wrong screws on my front. Oops. These call for 14s. Sometimes I run 12s. Kind of just depends on what screws I have. I put 12s on the front. I might need those 12s for the wing mount. Can't remember what screw size goes through the wing. Let's see. 1525. Oh, it's a 14. Alright, we'll go ahead, put the shock tower on now. Just like the front, this can go either direction. I'm going to put these lower screws on first. Because the next screws are going to go through the shock tower. I'm going to be building this car with the wing mount in the lowest position because of the wing that I'll be using. Actually, before I put the wing on, we'll go ahead and put the body mount on. Let's see. Should have some of those screws in tie. We'll just put steel ones in now. These new body mounts are pretty cool. They got 2 mounting locations. If you ran the 2.0 and you put these updated new shock towers on, you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. We just had the 1 mounting screw and it kind of moved around some, so it's a nice little update. Alright. Put the wing mount on now. Make sure I don't run those all the way in. It's a little hard to tell when you're doing these lower wing mount screws, so I try to be extra careful. Nothing worse than building a new car, stripping something out, because that just bums you out, especially something like a bulkhead, because it's not a super fun thing just to change when you really don't need to. Alright, so now put the screws through the top. When you raise this wing mount, there's some different mounting locations, and you'll have to have 2 extra screws, 2 extra nuts, which they come in the kit, which is nice. Because the lower wing mount screw won't go into the bulkhead like it does at this position. You'll have both screws going through the shock tower, and then the screw right here will just be going into the bulkhead. So this whole wing mount goes up. But there you go. Just like the front, we're gonna wait. I'm putting these on. Put my extra screws up here. And there we go. We got part 1 done. Bag A, B, C, and D. Front and rear bulkhead. center diff built. Thanks for watching. Make sure you stick around and join in for part 2.